All righty, we're going to get a start on it. Thank you for everyone who's joined us already. And I'm really, really excited to have here with me Brian. For those of you who have just joined us, this is the session on decoding the future of workflow automation. My name is Evan Wong. I am the co-founder and CEO of Checkbox. If you haven't heard of us before, we are a no-code automation platform designed for legal teams. And just a few housekeeping things before we jump into the introduction of Brian here. There is a Q&A chat, so feel free to go and hit that chat bubble up and type in the Q&A that you have. We will pick out questions here and there throughout the session to address them or answer them at the end. But I am really excited to have Brian Hupp here today with me. Brian was the Chief of Staff and Operations at EA, Electronic Arts, before he headed over to the Director of Legal Operations and Strategy for Dolby Laboratories, and then was the Head of Legal Ops at Facebook. He's been a pioneer in the space for a long, long time. He was part of the board and founding member of Clock, which we all love and know. But today, Brian is a senior strategist and legal operations consultant at Up Level Ops, and also a very avid artist and photographer. In fact, you just came back from a trip taking amazing photos. I've seen his work. If you haven't, go check it out as well. But Brian, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me, Evan. Doesn't sound like that guy got much sleep.
You and me both. Look, I'm really excited, and maybe just as kind of like an introduction, I mean, what kind of role has workflow automation played in your career? Because you've obviously had quite a lot of very relevant roles. Was workflow automation sort of there since the beginning for you? Was it in every single one of your roles, or did it really sit in one in particular?
Yeah, I feel like I should be laying down on a sofa probably, running through all of my history with workflow automation and process design. I think it all started back with my 4th grade teacher, actually, who made us document the process to build a peanut butter and jelly sandwich from scratch. And I got top marks there. So I think it just stuck with me. Anybody who knows me knows that I've been an advocate of workflow solutions, and bringing them into legal departments is really one of the fundamental tools in the legal ops toolbox. But also, beyond getting a number of things done that my teams and I have over the years, such as building out self-service NDA portals, building out marketing review portals, getting intake solutions in place. I think workflow for a lot of us represents a really great opportunity. And what I usually advocate with the GCs and the ops people who are just getting started is that it represents an easy chance for some quick wins at the beginning of your ops journey. And, whether any of us like to think of it in this way or not, you're always running a PR campaign, right? On both for yourself individually. We all have our annual or semi-annual reviews that we've got to get done and, list out our accomplishments. But our GCs have to do the same thing for the executive team. And the executive team has to do the same thing for the shareholders. Nobody likes anything more than business enablement and automation to get things moving faster. So it's also a really good opportunity to start building your street cred so that then you can move on to more complicated projects.
Awesome. So you'd say that, workflow automation is very much a very good, PR campaign in your words, because ultimately it does touch upon a lot of the different parts of the business, right? Because often when we think about workflow automation for legal, the for legal part is a little bit misleading, right? Because
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. it can originate.
Not at all. There's actually nothing legal specific about workflow automation. And that's another opportunity you have as you're trying to think about how to solve some of the legal related problems, like centralizing your intake so that you have better visibility across your workload hitting the department, so that you can more easily and in an automated way track like every item that's coming, request that's coming into you without having to grab your yellow pad, your yellow legal pad, or your back of an envelope sitting on your desk and make a list every day. You have a dashboard so that you can see what's pending in your work queue, where it is. But beyond getting those advantages for legal, it's really important to remember that these tools are enterprise level tools. And by bringing them in, if you're the guy who brings them in, you can also help other teams around the enterprise. One of the first adopters we saw at Electronic Arts was our HR groups, who were so gung-ho about getting HR onboarding up and running that they practically beat us to the to the punch in getting our NDA portal set up. And there are so many other needs around the enterprise that whether it's your sales group, your marketing group, finance, even your IT group, everybody has workflow needs. Everybody has forms that they need completed or processes that are repetitive, work queues they need to be built with dashboards around them. So it's an advantage. And one of the other things we always advocate from up level is that our GCs really reach out to other leaders in other departments and try to build alliances around bringing in workflow solutions to benefit more than just legal. And you also get the added benefit of being able to share the cost a lot of the time. So, win-wins set up with your potential business partners, and get somebody else to pay part of the tab. Nothing better.
Yeah, absolutely. And given how I guess wide stretching workflow automation tends to be, do you often think of that as perhaps a higher sophistication technology that you might bring in, after you've implemented some legal tech already, or do you tend to think about workflow automation as being one of the first foundational technologies that you should put in place as a legal operations team?
Well, I guess it depends on where you are in your journey. Every group and company has different needs, so it's important to think about your priorities. What we generally find, though, and especially over the last year, as I've been consulting with a lot of small to medium-sized legal departments, especially, is that there's often a rush towards systems like CLM and e-billing, which can be at least pretty complicated solutions to roll out with more limited exposure within the business, so a smaller group of users actually touching them, benefiting from them. So I always found that workflow is one of those things that gives you some really great PR wins from the beginning, because almost everybody is touching it. When you've got general intake processes, anybody who's reaching out to legal or to one of the other groups using it is touching it. They're getting the benefits of smart forms. So when they choose the type of request they're trying to enter, they don't have to fill out a bunch of irrelevant information. And they're also not doing what they usually do on email, which is send you 2 of the 5 pieces of information that you need, and then you email back and you get 1 more, and then you email back again and you get 1 more. It eliminates a lot of that email traffic and really streamlines the process for getting work going. So I always think of it, to answer your question, as a really foundational tool. Oftentimes, we'll advise clients who do need a CLM solution and will want to pair workflow with CLM to achieve a lot of what they need to achieve for the department. We'll suggest that they start with workflow. It starts giving them immediate metrics around the types of work that are flowing into the department, the volumes around those, the volumes that individuals are getting hit with within the department, especially within your very small departments. And it lets you start automating some of your self-service agreements, for example, and other processes, and just making them take less time, whether that's conflict of interest checks, or just, surveys and information gathering. There's a lot that handled in a manual way just takes a lot of bandwidth. And the idea is always to carve out everything that you can, put automation around it, or at least technology assist around it. So you and your teams can spend more time doing the higher value work, addressing the higher risk things for the business, and not drafting the 5,001 NDA that you've done in the last month, because hey, you're not getting anything more out of that. I've been there, I know. And then as you get those things going, you have more time to do the readiness work you need to do in order to get CLM, defined, organized, process mapped, prioritized, and so I always think of it as a really good thing to bring in early.
Awesome. And I want to pick up on the kind of the talk around CLM for a moment, because you and I were having a chat the other day, and I was actually asking you because a big part of the market now is, of course, talking about CLM. It's become its own kind of really self-standing phrase. Exactly. Almost as much as people are trying to grab onto the no-code title, and it's a thing of itself. And I think often with so much evolution that's happening on the technology end, it's hard as consumers and buyers of technology to always have a very clear idea of the difference between these types of technologies, especially when there is such an overlap and an interplay. I think you were talking about integrating your CLM with your workflow automation tool. And sometimes you'll hear, CLM having elements of workflow, and you might have your matter management systems having elements of workflow. So, it's probably a good idea if you can share again what you shared with me the other day. What is kind of the distinction that you see between CLM and workflow automation? Where do they cross and where do they don't?
Yeah, well, there's definitely a Venn diagram there in the middle where you have intersections, especially around contract requests and self-service contracting. But I guess at heart, fundamentally and sort of philosophically, I'm more of a best of breed kind of guy. I am an advocate of having my technology providers do what they do best. At the same time, so CLM providers focus on the contracts lifecycle management work and functionality there. It may be that you'll use some contracts workflows through that, even if you have a separate workflow system. But CLM systems are really never intended to manage all kinds of requests coming into legal. You just think about, your conflicts of interest requests, or general process questions, or requests to open a matter for your e-billing system, or things like that. Those are all things you can do over on the workflow side that you can't get done unless you're really jury rigging something up in a CLM system. So so I'm an advocate of having both. I think they both serve distinctive purposes. And I think for our clients, what we advocate is they really think hard and long about what their priorities are for the kinds of things they need to get done, and which kind of system, if they're looking at CLM versus workflow, what are they going to get the most immediate return on value for? Is it something that most of the business is going to touch? Or is it something that will be largely repository and a few kinds of contract workflows at the beginning, at least when you're getting going? And of course, as for more sophisticated departments, you always find more needs for workflow. You'll leverage your CLM systems to the hilt for whatever they can do. But again, I think the breadth of functionality and the scalability and flexibility that workflow tools provide, especially these no-code tools that you can manage within the legal department, really set you up for success.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, people think I'm a broken record, and I've always been a big advocate of workflow. One of the first things I did at Electronic Arts, at Dolby, and at Facebook was bringing workflow, and it wasn't always easy because you've always got the IT group sort of pointing at potentially other already existing solutions that you might think about using.
And exactly right. And I was actually going to my follow-up question, funnily enough, which is, we've talked about kind of, existing legal tech options and how workflow automation kind of fits into that. But, as a workflow provider ourselves, we often find that legal teams may fall in love with no-code workflow automation tools, but when they kind of run it up the flagpole, they very quickly meet their IT teams who are like, hey, we have workflow automation tools. It's called X and Y. Why don't you give that a shot? Why aren't you using that instead? So what are your thoughts around that? How have you kind of have you come across this, frequently? And what are your thoughts around sort of enterprise-wide sort of workflow automation tools versus no code for legal?
Yeah, one of the first things we always do in doing our legal operations assessments with our clients at up level is looking at the existing technology landscape for both the legal department and the company, our client company as a whole. And a lot of times they have things like Microsoft suites, so they have Microsoft Power Apps available to them. They have things like ServiceNow for help desk ticketing, or Jira, or other kinds of systems that IT has brought in order to help with ticketing management, really, at least foundationally, and sometimes some project management. What we always do is really look at the use cases that our clients have for workflow and help them prioritize those. And then we dig down into the requirements of those and do side-by-side comparisons with things like ServiceNow and MS Power Apps, because hey, if your requirements are simple and are not going to change in the future, you don't need that scalability, those things may be perfectly fine for you. So it's not always the right thing to come in and suggest a different system. But for most of us these days, we've got more complex needs that those tools can't always address. Around, if you just think about self-service contracting, for example, if you look at those systems, they really struggle managing multiple templates in a workflow. They struggle doing clause insertion because they're not really designed for that. Dynamic clause insertion into sort of agreement generation processes. And there may be other kinds of flexibility that you need, that that you find you run up against limitations in those tools. And it might even be like the number of available fields. That's often one you run up to when you're trying to leverage, figure out, can we leverage like Salesforce to do what we need to do? That's another very common question we get. But usually there aren't enough Salesforce fields available, not to mention the per user licensing costs that come along with that. So so having the access to these no-code workflow tools, I think is a real boon in providing a kind of flexibility and, again, scalability for what you need to do into the future.
Mm-hmm. And that makes a lot of sense in terms of the breadth of the use cases that you can solve. But what I also find is a very big differentiator there is really in the phrase no code, in that you're really trying to enable the control and agility of the legal department or the business departments, as opposed to joining the IT queue. And then even simple changes, because it's not just about the initial build, it's also about the ongoing maintenance, right? As you get feedback from users, as your precedent documents change, as the external environment outside of your business, like regulation changes, that nimbleness is actually a very, very important part, as you mentioned, in that scale. Yeah,
I couldn't agree more. That's really fundamental. And all of us, it doesn't matter what company you're at. When I was at a large social media company running legal operations, I still struggled getting the IT attention that I needed to help get a lot of what we needed to get done for the department. And when you're an even smaller department, you struggle even more to get that time and attention. Though I just worked with one client who had a huge number of templates that they needed to automate for self-service, and when their IT group said, well, ServiceNow does have some contract generation capabilities, and I said, yeah, but when you look at it, that and other tools can sometimes only manage one template per workflow. So you're looking at building out 180 workflows and maintaining them. I'm like, where are you going to get time, IT group, to do that? So yeah, no code tools are great because what you really want to do is get to that win-win with your IT group. Have their help getting single sign-on set up, have their help getting integrations built, which are essential to the success and adoption of rolling out workflow. But then give them their time back. You can manage template updates. You can manage, field level labels and FAQs, tooltips and all of that, to keep the process rolling.
Absolutely. And if it's okay with you, Brian, I would actually like to show, I'm not sure if people on this webinar have seen no code before, so I want to kind of flash it up as example of how it might look like, and feel free to jump in and provide any commentary you have as well, any comments. But this is kind of what we're talking about, right? When we talk about no code, it's not meant to be technical. It's not meant to be writing these crazy scripts. It's meant to be very easy for the business user to use, drag and drop, and almost as you map out your process, not only are you mapping it out, from start to the first agreement information form to then making a decision around the monetary threshold, et cetera, but the idea is that as you map the tool out, it creates the user experience to interact and move through this workflow. It creates the workflow for you as well. And of course, as you kind of introduce new screens, let's say you wanted, I wasn't logged in because of timeout. But as you kind of go and introduce new screens into the application, it's really as easy as dragging and dropping, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things back on our discussion about bringing this in and helping your IT group understand what's possible here. One of the things that I've done is invite them to basically a demo off, like a dance off, but a demo off of what you're trying to build out with kind of your prototype, and you'll really help them understand in a much faster way when you demo what some of these no-code tools can do, whether it's Checkbox or another one that you're looking at the same time, and then have your IT group show you what they can get done in the existing tools. And again, it can be a totally fair competition, but you really want to get down to understanding at the end of the day which tool sets are really going to meet our requirements for what we need to get done. I mean, results are sort of what counts at the end of the day. And I've always found that once my IT groups actually saw these tools in action, and in one case where they saw 100% of our functionality in the demo, which was built in one day, where they had given me a 6 to 9 month timeline for building something out. Their jaws were all hanging open, and I suddenly got no resistance. I actually got CIOs coming to me and thanking me for bringing in a solution that was good for the enterprise, and not just legal, but again, the whole company.
We see that time and time again. It's so funny because you look at
so
legal.
Satisfying.
It's so satisfying. It's so good. Like you often have legal being seen as an industry as laggards to technology, but then you have workflow automation almost becoming this superpower, and we see it all the time. Like HR, you will come to legal, or procurement will come to legal and say, how did you do that? What tool are you using? And all of a sudden you have legal becoming the center of excellence of workflow automation for the enterprise. It is hilarious. Like, it is so cool. So badass.
It's really great. And it's, as I said at the beginning, it's really served me well from that PR perspective, because at the end of the day, I just need stuff to work better, and I need stuff to work better for my teams. But if I can actually help other teams do the same thing and get wins for themselves, suddenly I've got a lot of partners who are much more receptive to sitting down and talking about the next stuff, the more difficult stuff that you need to tackle. And a lot more, as I said, street cred within the organization for being someone who gets stuff done. And there's really nothing that makes your job easier than that. At the end of the day, you want allies. I told my IT teams, wherever I was, after I fought them tooth and nail in a lot of cases to bring these solutions in, when we finally got it out, I was like, you guys take credit for it. That's fine. I don't care. The people who need to know, who are doing my review, know what I've done. Take credit for it, go out, leverage it with other parts of the organization. And then you're better served too as someone who brought in the tool, because having other parts of the organization using it, you're much less likely to have to constantly justify the expense for it, and constantly defend, having another solution in the building.
Absolutely. Now this session is about the future of workflow automation. So I definitely want to get into that now. Where do you see it going, right? You've obviously seen years and years of its evolution. With that kind of background and knowing where we are, where do you think we need to go as an industry, and where do you think the technology is going to end up?
Yeah, I think I have a number of thoughts about that. I think there are things that are more achievable now, and things that will become more possible as we get a little deeper in. So I'd say the first thing, and one of the things I've always advocated as one of the founders of Clock, is the need to drive collaboration. everybody's building workflows out there. We need to share them back into common pools so that other people coming along who are just starting their workflow journey can take advantage of them. I think that's really, it's really important. You know, most of us know there's nothing proprietary about what we built out in our workflows. But if you build a good NDA flow that has a second line, you know, ability for the requester to actually, you know, put in fallback provisions and keep it going, you know, continue to enable the business, keep it from hitting legal even in round 2, you know, you're going to be really well served, and so is so is your counterpart at you know, the company next to you. So for all of you in ACC, legal operators, Clock, Link, other groups, we should all always be thinking about collaboration and sharing. That's sort of number one. I think, again, building out workflows that benefit, that go between a broader segment of business groups within the enterprise, I think is something that's totally achievable now. Again, partner with other teams, help them understand what's achievable, help them get their workflows done, and especially where you have collaboration, leverage the workflow tools for that. As we move forward, I think it's going to be really important that the APIs for these tools are easy to use. A lot of the integrations are just out of the box for things like single sign-on for Salesforce, HubSpot, other CRMs, you know, but also to move workflow closer to litigation tool sets, you know, privacy management software. I mean, everybody's got data subject access requests coming in now. That's workflow coming in from the outside, but you've got to have it. You've got to be on top of it, and you know, with all these different privacy regimes, and you know, and there's no reason why you shouldn't be leveraging these tools for that as well. But even for tools like Slack, obviously CLM. I think the tighter integration we get between a lot of these best of breed tools, and the easier it is to integrate them, the better off we're all going to be with respect to data collection and analytics, making sure our workflows are really effective and built well. So the process analysis, sort of the meta view of the workflow. How is it working? How is it performing? You know, did you build it the right way to begin with? Do you need to fine tune? All of those kinds of analytics are really important. And then I think as we get farther into the future, and you know, shiny object alert with AI and machine learning, you know, which we're still at the very early stages of. You know, you get greater possibilities for RPA, so robotic process automation support. So getting FAQs answered when people need a copy of a policy, getting that zipped back out to them, things like that. And then leveraging machine learning to make sure that, you know, all of your self-service agreements on your workflow side are getting profiled accurately into your repository of record at the end of the day. Things like that. So I think process automation and ML advances are something that workflow automation is a really good place for people to do experimentation around. You know, our friends at Google did a lot of studying up on their NDA processes and sort of doing machine learning training to automate more of that and really get humans out of the NDA business. And I think workflows offer sort of processes that are well-defined within guardrails, sort of more known outcomes than other things like trying to do analytics on third-party agreements that you're taking in, which which needs to be done, but but there's just I think machine learning training around workflow tools is actually something that's becoming much more possible in the next number of years, and something I hope you, Evan, will continue to push with really practical purposes and really well-defined purposes.
Absolutely. I've taken heaps of notes from our conversation, Brian. So really excited to take it all on board. We actually have a Q&A here just to jump into our usual flow of things, but we've got a Q&A from Zach Bates. Good to see you, Zach, on the call. So Zach's one of the legal ops people over at the Pokemon Company. His question is, do you have any tips for discussions with less than enthusiastic or resource limited IT teams to bring on new tools? That's a really good question. I'm sure a lot of us are facing that challenge. So what's your tip for Zach?
Yeah, we spend a lot of time looking at the ROI of these kinds of tools for our clients at up level, and that's what you hit them with. Part of the advantage of workflow tools is there are such well documented ROIs around the time and dollar savings effectively that you can achieve. There are a lot of companies who who look at this, and even estimating the most conservative amount of time when you think about requests coming in by email and people keeping their own tracking logs. If you think of 10 minutes, per request, and you multiply that out times the salary or, expected salary of the kinds of people who are handling those requests, you really see that workflow will pay for itself in almost no time. I think Forrester and Gardner both said that that it's like 2.5 years workflow tools pay for themselves. I've always found it to be a lot faster than that. But it depends on your use cases. But there are ROI calculators on a number of sites that you can go play with, and I think that time savings, telling your GC that you can help them with headcount management by reducing the amount of volume work that needs to be done by people in the department, refocusing those people on more substantive work, and better managing headcount overall. Those are really powerful arguments. And I think getting your GC or other leadership involved in those discussions with IT will actually get them happening at the appropriate level. A lot of the times, initially, you're talking to program managers who are overwhelmed and under-resourced themselves, struggling with the idea of bringing in more tools to manage because they immediately think, oh God, like my day is going to get worse. But helping them understand that these are tools that need setup initially, but don't need heavy IT resourcing. I think all of those things, make it really easier, and then make IT do that dance off that I talked about, where they have to compare what the alternatives are and prove to you that they can actually meet your needs.
And to some extent, Brian, the interesting thing about no-code tools is that movement of citizen development, which is the argument is IT should embrace these workflow tools because it means that a lot of those kind of almost point solution requests that come from the business can now be solved hopefully by the business, right? And so it creates a bit of a win-win. I think you used that phrase earlier on. Yeah. Awesome. Thanks for the question, Zach. And that's a great answer. I want to kind of finish off with just your top advice. Let's go two ways. For the people who are just embarking or thinking about their workflow automation journeys, they haven't started yet, they're about to, they're thinking about it. What would be your number one top piece of advice for them?
I think other than what we've already covered, I think really there's one word, and it's readiness. your potential vendors will talk to you about how quickly you can get things up and running. And it's true, Evan showed you, and he'll do that too. Evan showed you the admin tool, but you don't want to be designing your process when you open your admin tool for the first time. So really, I think do some goal setting, know what your objectives are and what your first use cases are. Do your process mapping, always process before you run to technology. And then work up your project plan and your detailed requirements. That will at least, at an 80% point, because that will help you actually look at the tools that are available on the market and do a really close inspection on what does my use case number one look and feel like in this tool versus this other one. And you can make much more informed decisions than you can if you wait until you purchase the tool and then you get into it and then you do circles running around trying to figure out, how to do something that you were thinking of but didn't really detail. It always takes more time and more dollars at that point. So readiness is really important. There are a lot of workflows like gathering hotel preferences for offsites that are coming up from your legal team or things like that. Yeah, slap those together and get them out. Those are going to be like really quick use workflows, and they'll get you the data you need. But the ones that are going to be fundamental to you, take more time, give it some good thought. And then ask your providers like Evan to show you demos that look like what you will actually need to build.
That's amazing. And yeah, no, I completely agree. It's so important to have your processes designed and understood, because garbage in equals garbage out. And if you put a broken process into a technology, you just do that broken thing faster.
Yeah. You don't want to just recreate your current process either in the workflow tool, because you can realize so many more efficiencies that you weren't able to do when you had a manual process. So,
yeah.
So rethink things from scratch. It's really worth taking that time. It'll save you a lot of time when you get to builds. They'll happen much faster if you know what fields do I need for this, what are relevant pieces of information for this type of requests, and you've done that research with the attorneys in your group, your process owners around the business. That'll just lead to greater adoption and much more success.
And can I just say, because I can imagine some people hearing that advice and still feeling a little bit lost because they may not exactly knowing that they need to be thinking about readiness, but not knowing how to almost get to that readiness point to even look at technology. I just want to say there are a lot of organizations and the community. Brian was talking about leverage the GC peer network, leverage, Clock, leverage legal operators. There are so many great organizations out there with a wealth of knowledge. There's so much to learn from the community. And the great thing about legal technology and legal operations is it's such a collaborative community, which is why we love being part of it, right? But there are also organizations that literally do this for a day job, like where you're from, Brian. You do this for a day job at Upper Level Ops, right? So don't feel like you have to go at this alone. I think definitely leverage communities, definitely leverage, different consultants and different sort of help points like that. So with that said, oh, sorry, Brian, did you want to jump in there?
I would say absolutely. And while it's a bit self-serving, we're here to help you, but there are lots of other groups that can help you as well, especially for any of you who are resource constrained.
Absolutely. With that said, I had one more question I would have liked to ask, but I want to respect everyone's time on this webinar. So with that said, I'm going to go and wrap up by just sharing our contact details here in case anyone wants to kind of continue the conversation with us. And luckily I put that up there because it just reminded me to actually launch this poll, which is if you rather just click yes here than to send us an email, then we'll get in contact with you. It just makes it your lives easier. We're all about efficiency, streamlining, making lives easy all the way through. So if you want us to reach out to you, just hit the yes button. Otherwise, our emails are there, myself and Brian, or connect with us on LinkedIn. But with that said, Brian, it was an absolute pleasure having this conversation with you. I always learn so much when I have a chat with you, and I'm sure everyone else on this call did as well. So thank you for being so gracious with your time.
And thanks everybody for joining.
Awesome. All right, guys. Well, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you all soon.
All right.